Yellow. So, you want to start a militia, do you? But before we start, like, share, and subscribe, and shall we begin? I think it's important to start with the social ramifications of starting a militia before we get into it. One of the most obvious to start with would be the fact that there is clear unease it can cause with, say, employers or any schools you might be going to, not to mention in your home life. Your family, well, they might support your political views. They may not support joining an armed group. However, that's for you and your family to decide now, isn't it? Your friends might not be that supportive either. Well, if they are, well, there's a source of recruitment right there. Also, you have to think of what the government might think. Yeah, it may be your right to associate with whom you wish. However, the reigning authority might decide they need to keep a track on you. On top of that, you could be placed on any number of watch lists in which it'll become much harder to travel and get pre-approved for things. Your credit card company might drop you as a client. Your bank might close out your accounts. There is a huge risk when you do something that largely in most part of society might not be considered acceptable. Even if it is, no sane authority, if you have any sort of gripe with them, will not impose some sort of social consequences. Now that we're past that part, we get into the meat of it, which is, for one, starting the militia to begin with, which requires at least some sort of planning, including and not limited to some sort of founding document to create a structure for which the rest of the group is to follow if you want to maintain any sort of commonality with the people in your militia. This can take the form of requiring everyone to have roughly the same values as you, standardization of equipment to the best of your ability. That may not be completely possible, considering you are limited to what you can buy or acquire. This document should also include some sort of hierarchy and command, if at all possible, but it's not inherently necessary. Some sort of guideline for your goals, and on top of that, your code of conduct and some sort of training requirements should be implemented as well in this document. However, as stated before, it's not inherently necessary to have it in your founding charter. So where do we move from here? Well, it's obvious. Supplying your militia after you've established a means of recruitment. Recruitment can be through advertisement, however, that has its own risk, because then you make it quite obvious what you're doing. If you're part of a larger community and already have a ready supply of people, you can use word of mouth in order to spread around what you're doing. You can go around and advertise yourself by taking out flyers and recruitment pamphlets and seeing who might be interested. I would be careful to stick around areas that happen to have people with values similar to your own, for one's own safety, of course. There is a consideration, though, that the more people you recruit, the harder it is going to be to supply those people. You would have some sort of requirement that people are to provide their own supplies or a portion of them. However, that makes it a bit cost prohibitive to join your group. So your group can set aside money, if you raise any, to effectively buy equipment, create your own little budget. Now again, as stated before, where possible, it is best to standardize, as you are able to do so. However, that possibility can vary from points in time and how much funding, if any, you can bring to bear. Now we're going to have to consider the fact you're going to need to take time to train as a group and individually with whatever equipment you can get your hands on, which might be pretty sparse for a while. Then on top of that, you have to consider if anything does look like it's going to start gearing up, the reigning authority is going to try to do anything it can to make it harder for you to acquire equipment, particularly things like rifles and ammunition, or whatever else you happen to be using. They might raid any headquarters you happen to have set up. or training facilities, if any. And on top of that, if your group ain't well trained enough to work together in group exercises, when you do need each other, it's going to be next to impossible to coordinate with one another, which is going to add a whole host of other problems. Trust is quite important now. At the very least, predictability. Then there's the fact you might be able to get some pretty advanced firearms training outside of your own group and any experience they're bringing in with it. There's places now which do offer some fairly good courses. And on top of that, some of them offer group courses, so you can sign up as a group, not just as individuals going to train. Now, to things like acquiring intergroup training, that really needs to be done on one's own time, as you need groups you are familiar with, militias you're willing to maintain amicable terms. However, it is best to remember the larger your group and your network you create between other groups, the bigger target you are for potential scrutiny by the reigning authority. A couple of individuals just hanging out at the gun range with their deer rifles, it's a lot different between a large group of a couple hundred or even thousand in a militia that have high qualities training, or at least the very best a civilian can get, that is potentially part of a larger group. That's something completely else, and a bit more menacing than just the earlier mentioned couple guys at the range, especially to any authority that might have reason to believe you hold a grudge against them, or at the very least are concerned about keeping their authority. Now, is there any specific equipment that I would recommend? Well, in the case of rifles, that's in an upcoming video. Other than that, it's really just what you can get your hands on and trained with. Although one I would definitely recommend is anything that relates to food preservation equipment. Also, any military and other manuals for survival and for guerrilla and resistance training. Although that last bit is a good way to get yourself put on a watch list. Well, that's going to be all for now. Thank you for your time. Like, share, and subscribe, and see you around.